Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here at my next Airspeed's Avatar Rewatch video. This one is going to be for Book 2 Earth Episode 3, Return to Omashu. This one's animated by DR Movie, so the secondary animation studio. And yeah, let's get into this one. So a very interesting episode in that we get the introduction of Mei and Ty Lee, and the start of what obviously a lot of the fans call the Ozai's Angels group, that being Azula, Mei, and Ty Lee together. And in addition to this, obviously we meet Bumi again and get the fact that, okay, Bumi's not going to be Aang's earthbending teacher, so who is? That felt like one of the most clear and concise things about this. He has to be Aang's teacher. That's what was clearly set up in the first season. That was Aang's, what he said in the last couple of episodes, in episode 1 of this book. So that being changed is suddenly this big thing of just whoa, who's actually going to be now? Obviously, Zhong was not meant to be Aang's firebending teacher, so that's still up in the air. But it's one of those episodes where I tend to forget some of the things that happen in this one. I don't think it's the most important episode, in that I feel they maybe could have spent a little bit more time establishing Mei and also Ty Lee as characters, in that I almost feel they could have made this a two-parter, where you have the character set up be for Azula, Mei, and Ty Lee, and their friendship be a core part of the first part, and then the issue in Omashu be maybe the second episode and the fight stuff that happens. It's fine as it is. I just feel come the end of the season, and even right now where we are in the comics, I still feel we need to know a little bit more about the Mei, Ty Lee, and Azula kind of friendship dynamic. And we'll get into that as we go through it, but, it's another interesting topic. So, yeah. This one is also another interesting episode because it, especially now with Smoke and Shadow in mind, we actually get a lot more development for Mei. Ty Lee is also more of a focus in Smoke and Shadow as well. Plus, Mei's family is expanded upon in Rebound as well as Smoke and Shadow in the comics. So if you want to know Mei's father especially more, but also her mother a little bit, read that comic and you'll know a lot more about them. And Mei, I think, as a character especially, she's probably the in terms of overall what Smoke and Shadow does and is about, her character development within that book is probably the best part of Smoke and Shadow. So if you're a fan of Mei, definitely read that comic. But yeah, so we obviously react to the fact that Omashu is under Fire Nation control. That's how we start the episode. Immediately our team sneaks in the secret passage and are seen by Fire Nation guards. They get out of this because Sokka on the way in had got these kind of purple pentapusses stuck to his face, and when they were taken off, they had these markings on them. And so when the Fire Nation guard sees Sokka, he thinks Sokka has some form of illness or disease. And Katara is kind of quick to react here and is just oh, he's got pentapox, it's contagious, you should probably stay away from him. And this obviously spreads around within the Fire Nation guards within the town. And this ends up being a thing come the middle of the episode that's used as a way to get all of the civilians, basically the citizens of Omashu, free from the Fire Nation kind of control. And we also get established then that there is a resistance within the town, within the village, that is going against the Fire Nation control, and that Bumi actually surrendered, that he didn't even attempt to fight to defend Omashu. He just immediately surrendered and annoyed a lot of the resistance fighters here. We obviously learn by the end that Bumi, this was part of his plan, that as a way to kind of continue with his philosophy of neutral Jing, which is basically doing nothing or waiting to find the right moment to attack, this is his plan. And so he very specifically didn't want to fight at this point in time, but is preparing for something, which is very interesting. But it also means that he can't be the one to teach Aang earthbending. The Jings are interesting in that it ultimately is just this kind of philosophy thing rather than really being a meaningful kind of mechanics type thing that's introduced into the lore, in that it's not oh, there's this type of bending and there's multiple types. It's just okay, so it's offensive, defensive, and then neutral. And then he mentions there's 85 other ones, but it's just like we're never really. Jings are not something I think we'll ever learn more about, and I don't really think there's a lot to be discussed. I really think the 85 part is just a bit of a joke, rather than it potentially meaning some sort of thing about like battle tactics or anything. So, even as me, who's someone who's like really likes to know a lot about like everything that's established, the 85 Jings thing is something I'm just like, okay, well we'll just accept that the 3 that we know is important and the other ones aren't. But yeah, so with Aang's side of things, it's an interesting one in that with this episode, they kind of just have to accept that Omashu is under control of the Fire Nation, and that Bumi is not going to teach Aang, and it's not like a loss as such for the characters here, and that they managed to get away, and they have freed a lot of the civilians, in that they've helped the resistance fundamentally, but in terms of their direct goal, they haven't really accomplished all that much. We do get later on that the city is renamed New Ozai in honor of Azula comes in and renames it after her father, so that's interesting. And I suppose with Smoke and Shadow in mind, it's also interesting that we find out here that Mei's father, Ukano, is the governor of this new Ozai place, and I think he's one of the ones where it's just like they very, I think, wisely chose to use him as a character, a main character in Smoke and Shadow, but they had to develop him a bit more. I think they used aspects from this episode to form the character that we obviously get much more in depth on in the comic, of just that, okay, if he was put in charge of a big captured town within the Earth Kingdom, he clearly has to be super loyal to Ozai for Ozai to trust someone with running the town like this. So immediately one trait of Ukano is going to be his loyalty to Ozai. And that explains why he would then be part of the New Ozai Society. And I suppose potentially why he would also call the society the New Ozai Society, because he was once the governor of New Ozai. So I like that he fundamentally believes in Ozai's way of ruling, and that's why he here is getting a promotion here, obviously running this important captured town for the Fire Nation. So I like that they use that aspect of him, because you don't really get much on his character of Ukano. Equally with her mother Michi, you don't get a lot on. Tom Tom is used here for plot reasons, where like he walks away, Momo ends up kind of bringing him to the Resistance inadvertently, and they think that the Resistance has captured him, and this prompts the big trade scene between, obviously, Team Avatar is going to trade Tom Tom for King Bumi. Except it's interrupted because, of course, Azula, Mei, and Ty Lee are now leading the trade, and they don't feel it's worthwhile. So, getting into the introduction of the new team here, Azula, the idea here is that Lo and Lee basically give Azula advice that, like, bringing all this royal kind of flourish stuff around with you makes you slow. You can't accomplish what you need to in this case. You have to be quick and hunt Zuko and Iroh. So she decides that yes, I need an elite small team that can quickly go into action, and so she immediately says, I need to find my old friends, and we see her go to Ty Lee first. And Ty Lee here, we find out that she is the daughter of a nobleman from the Fire Nation, so her family is more or less established to be roughly on par with Mei's family, who obviously has to be high up in Fire Nation society for him to get a role like that. Ty Lee is very similar, except she has chosen to actually leave that behind and join the circus. We find out why, the details behind why she did this, in part in the beach episode, but also more in the free comic Sisters, which is about Ty Lee, where we get introduced to her sisters, and I suppose why she wanted to separate herself from her sisters and kind of have her own unique thing and not just be part of a matched set. So there's a lot of development on these characters in the comics. But I think what's interesting here with the dynamic is that Ty Lee is happy to see Azula, and the implication is that they haven't seen each other in a while. But Ty Lee only really wants to see Azula for like a little bit. The second she finds out that Azula's kind of sticking around and that she's maybe not just going to accept Ty Lee's decision that she wants to stay at the circus, Ty Lee's on edge around Azula, so she kind of knows that Azula's like this, and it speaks in general to the fact of like, okay, they were clearly friends in the past, but how much of this is that Azula was always this, commanding presence and was always kind of, forcing them to be your friends and kind of using them in this way, and how much of it is that they were friends, but Azula gradually shifted from being a character that May and Ty Lee actually liked and were friends with into being more of the person that she is now, who they don't necessarily want to be around all the time. And that's what I think is going to need to be an important aspect of like Azula's arc going forward within the series, in the comics, of just clearly the betrayal of May and Ty Lee, which happens later on in the series, is one of the huge factors for Azula's kind of downfall mentally, and the two huge factors in terms of why that happens. So clearly Azula and her friendship with May and Ty Lee, their friendship is important to her, but she doesn't fundamentally understand why May and Ty Lee don't really consider their friendship with Azula as important as like their friendship with each other. Because I think this episode made it quite clear that like May and Ty Lee are actually very close and are like just honestly good friends, and that the implication is that they were in touch with each other, in that Azula isn't necessarily clear on why Ty Lee joined the circus. She knows that she did, but doesn't know why. Whereas immediately May and Ty Lee reunite, and May is just like, "Oh, I thought you wanted to join the circus. You said it was your calling and all this stuff." So they've kept in touch and have like talked to each other about their kind of situation, but they've been a bit more distant from Azula. So I definitely would like more development on this relationship, because so far where we've gotten to past is that Azula's always been like somewhat manipulative. I think that the idea is that it's not just a case of like being around Ozai so much has morphed Azula into this very manipulative character, that her character at the base level has always been like this to a degree, but she then became like solely focused on that side of things, that she never moved past just being overly manipulative. She's never really learned that like, oh, with my friends I don't have to manipulate them because they're my friends. So she's missed out on some important kind of like just basic kind of ways to be friends with people. But that's more focusing on the future. That's not addressed too much within this episode. But what she does, I suppose, to get Ty Lee on her side is interesting. She stays to watch one of the performances, and then, because she's the princess, basically manipulates the circus master into basically making the performance even more dangerous. They light the safety net on fire. They release all the animals, and you can tell that Ty Lee is pretty frightened that this is happening, and more or less knows that this is kind of Azula telling her that like, I didn't say it to you as such, but I want you on my team and I won't accept no for an answer. And Ty Lee obviously doesn't say as such that like, okay, you forced me to join you. She just kind of makes up that like, oh, the universe is telling me to join you, and later joins up. So there's still a sense of, I think, that the two girls both still consider Azula like a proper friend, but obviously, as I said, they're not as close with Azula as they are with each other. Is definitely the implications that I get here. And then with May, she doesn't really need to convince May, but you can tell with May it's just like, oh, it's really boring just being around my family in Omashu and just basically having to be the daughter to my father kind of type thing. So the second anything of note comes up, she just joins she joins up with Azula. And I think it's telling with May throughout the entire series that she always just does her own thing, really. She, yes, is ultimately goes along with Azula's plans, but the second the plans call for May to do something more than she feels that she needs to do, like expend more energy than necessary, May's perfectly fine with just being like, okay, we've lost, I'm not going to put too much effort in, I'm just going to accept that we've lost this battle and go on. She doesn't really care if she gets like punished or like shouted at by Azula. So there's definitely a sense of like Ty Lee is terrified of Azula, I think, and is going to do it out of a lot of fear, whereas May, I think, ultimately has a decent fear of Azula, but is more willing to kind of is more what she knows that, like, because they are friends, that she doesn't necessarily need to just cower around Azula. It's an interesting dynamic in that the how Ty Lee approaches being part of the team versus how May approaches being part of the team. But yeah, there's that. The other thing would just be that I think with May, what they needed to at some point address within the show is why she just didn't really seem to care massively about, like, her brother. They obviously later kind of compensate for that by showing that in Rebound and then also in Smoke and Shadow that she really does care about Tom Tom to a, like, massive degree, in that, like, that's a kind of plot point within Rebound and Smoke and Shadow. It's her looking out for Tom Tom a lot and showing how much of a good sister she is. And I think it's in part to make up for moments like this, and I suppose potentially a lot of it is also that Azula took over the trade deal when May was kind of put in charge, and I don't think May was willing to, at that point in time, kind of just step up and say that, like, no Azula, I don't agree with you ending this trade deal. We have to get my brother back. I think this is maybe an example of May's fear of Azula, that she's willing to, you know, maybe abandon missions if she thinks it's going wrong, but she's not willing to just directly oppose Azula on anything, which obviously makes her eventual opposition to something Azula does later on in the series all the more meaningful. But yeah, then that's when a lot of the action happens, and I think a moment that I almost, like, forget is just like, oh yeah, like, this is the episode where Azula, like, meets Aang and realizes that she's fighting the Avatar for the first time, in that they're right there, but she is not aware that this is Team Avatar. These are just the three members of the Resistance she's dealing with. And then when Aang airbends, she realizes that, like, oh, this is the Avatar I happen to have come across here. What luck for me. I think that's just a moment I kind of always forget, that, like, that is a big moment for Azula, where she adds another person that she's after to her list. And it's cool because Azula is presented as being exceptionally skilled, but Aang is able to kind of be a match for her, which I really like, in that obviously Azula's pushing and on the offensive here, whereas Aang obviously, of course, takes the defensive, given that he's looking after Bumi as well. But I like that he's able to, for the most part, hold off Azula and just gets a little bit of help from Bumi right at the end with Azula's last attack. It shows that, you know, they're both exceptionally skilled, you know, prodigal, you know, examples of benders of their element. That's Azula for firebending, Aang for airbending. That they are both masters, basically, and they're experienced as well. Whereas, like, Katara is, like, a new master, so you can understand her still having to gain that battle experience, whereas, like, Aang and Azula have just so many years and that they've been training their entire lives, basically. They're on a little bit of a different level, and Katara, of course, over the course of the series, gains that experience. And then on the other side, you get May and Ty Lee against Sokka and Katara. Katara does most of the fighting initially because Sokka's looking after Tom Tom. But we see that, of course, May fights using knives and kind of having secret kind of, like, shooters of these little blades and darts. It's a really cool fight style in that she can take people by surprise, and, you know, you kind of have to, she's so accurate, you have to block a lot of her attacks, which Katara ends up kind of stonewalling her a bit, but the 2-on-1 situation and the reveal that Ty Lee is a chi blocker and can actually temporarily take away someone's bending for a bit is a really big reveal. That's a cool skill for her to have because she's very gymnastic, and you see how she moves in the battle and how she's different than most people that we've seen. In that, like, Aang is quite acrobatic in his fighting, but in a different way, in that he can use airbending to just, like, jump, whereas she's just, like, doing these kind of crazy maneuvers that look like she's gonna, like, break her back almost everywhere. So it's cool to see that. And just obviously the result is that Appa comes in, saves everyone, and kind of blows May and Ty Lee away, and Aang gets away with Bumi, and we get that scene at the end where Bumi says that, you know, the teacher that you eventually find has to be a master of neutral Jing, has to wait and listen, it can't be me, and that's the kind of result at the end of this episode. So Interesting enough stuff. I don't think it quite has the impact of maybe some of the other episodes, but it's an important episode in terms of introducing these new characters. Azula meeting Aang and now adding him to her list that she's now after Zuko, Iroh, and Aang, and just setting up a little bit of the rivalries of like Sokka and Katara versus Mei and Ty Lee. Azula, Zuko, and Aang is going to be like our three main kind of fights in terms of a rivalry that's going to happen, that sort of thing. But yeah, that's the episode. It's fun with the pentapox stuff that they do, acting like zombies to free everyone, and the joke on the Fire Nation side of just it's clearly a made up illness, but because no one's a medical expert, they're all like, "Wait, pentapox? I've heard of that. You have that, don't you?" And it's just like that's a kind of common thing. If you just say anything that's like an illness to someone, like you're just like, yeah, that sounds about right. So that was a fun little joke. But yeah, that's the review. So not the greatest episode, but has some notable moments in it and is very solid compared to I think a lot of episodes from book one, which also are quite solid. This is a much better episode than a lot of the similar things I've said about book one episodes, and that there's an importance in terms of returning to Omashu, the situation we have here, the introduction of new characters, the setup of who Aang's earthbending teacher may or may not be, and stuff like that. So that's my review. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on the episode and what I had to say. But yeah, that's been the video for today. Thanks for watching, and bye.